Well, welcome to our panel this afternoon. I'm super excited. I hope you guys got some good caffeine out there during the break because we're going to have a really stimulating dialogue and discussion. We're going to be kicking off the panel discussing disproportionately impacted communities, workforce strength, and changing regulations. We really want to discuss how to work together to balance diverse interests for the common good. I'm Courtney Taylor. I'm a principal at Ramble's Fort Collins, Colorado office. I'm thrilled to be here to introduce my colleagues. Tyson Johnston, Chris Clark, and Sergio Cordova. Tyson?
My name is Tyson Johnston. If you want to learn a little more about me, you can check page 21, but some personal things about myself. My tallest was ever measured was 6'11 3/4. I am now shrinking, which is a great thing. I don't much like socks, at least tall socks, so as you can see, my ankles and at my height, loafers aren't that comfortable. So I love to fly fish, and I love the state of Colorado. So I'm happy to be here and share a few things about disproportionately impacted communities and my experience with the EJ task force.
Good deal. Yeah, Chris Clark here with Laramie Energy. And just a little again about myself. So I'm about a 5th generation Western Colorado native. Have been fortunate enough to grow up here in Western Colorado, and again, I feel pretty appropriately positioned to talk a little bit about the DICs. Again, I live in a DIC. I have property in a DIC. I have a property in a DIC with well pads on it. Again, I think it's a topic that is very important to Laramie Energy and all of industry, particularly in Western Colorado. Just a little bit about Laramie, just to set the stage for that, and we'll talk more about it as we get into it. But Laramie Energy, again, is, I guess I would say, one of the pioneers of Piceance when it comes to development. Came in about 2005 and started drilling wells, buying acreage, and have formed and reformed a time or two, but we're still here clicking away, operate about 1,500 wells in Mesa and Garfield County. So, and again, I'm the VP of Field Operations is what I'm tasked with every day. So,
thank you, Chris.
My name is Sergio Cordova. I'm a business agent with Pipefitters Local 28. Glad to be at the Western Slopes. I actually graduated from Eagle Valley High School, so I'm a devil. Excited. I was excited. Couldn't wait to get out of Eagle Valley, right? Eagle, Colorado, and move up to this big city. And I wish I can come back, but I can't afford it no more, right? It's crazy. But I've been with Pipefitters for 26 years. So I graduated from Eagle Valley in '96, moved to Denver, started my apprenticeship with the Pipefitters local union in 1998. From there, had a good paying job, benefits, and eventually got my whole family in there. I got my cousin, he's a business agent. My 2 kids, my 2 sons, they're both apprentices in the apprenticeship, 18 and 22-year-old. 2 brothers, they're younger than me, but they're both journeymen doing well with the Pipefitters. 6 years ago, I became a business agent, and 3.5 years ago, I became the political coordinator as well. So, thank you.
That's fantastic. Well, welcome. I appreciate all of your participation in advance. Before we dive into our discussion today, I thought it might be valuable for folks to have a little bit of a recap of the rapid pace of change that we've experienced here in Colorado as related to the development and definition of our disproportionately impacted communities that really affects the social, economic, and environmental framework systems that we're part of. Now, I had a little bit of a pitch lined up for this slide, but I think Howard's point earlier about how one of the hurdles that he's experiencing is how tangled some of the systems are, and that they're not necessarily working well together, and that they're taking a lot of time to untangle that. I think this is a slide that shows where we are in our journey. It's only about 3.5 years since the EJ Act in Colorado, so we have a lot of time. We have been at this for a very short period of time. So I think this is a good time to take the opportunity to kind of untangle any kind of inconsistency that we might see that cause barriers to our overall progress. Tyson will be talking more about the EJ Act and the task force. I'll talk a little bit about some of the other bullet points on this slide, specifically the launch of EnviroScreen, which is a screening tool developed by the state of Colorado to assess where our most vulnerable communities are and the drivers that affect those definitions and the designation of a community as disadvantaged. There were also numerous rules and regulations, more than can fit on this slide, that came from the legislative drivers, specifically thinking of the Air Quality Control Commission, changes to Regulation 7 that first started with the upstream sector. Then we had Regulation 3 that affects all industries, all permitting activities. And then we had, just as Ana Gutierrez was talking about, the midstream rulemaking in December. Overlaid on top of that is the ECC, the ECMC's rulemaking. We had, oh my goodness, cumulative impacts was already discussed. Produced water is going to be discussed later. We also have geothermal and Class 6. So there's just a variety of other types of rulemaking actions that are all interwoven here. I'll move forward. I have just one or two quick slides to kind of set the groundwork of what are we talking about here. This is a map of the locations of communities and areas in Colorado that are designated and defined as a disproportionately impacted community. There are 8 criteria used to define these areas, 8 criteria used to define a census block group as a DIC, and they are additive. So each criteria is used independently, which results in the map that we see, where 50% of over 50% of the state area is in an area geographically defined as a DIC, and 46% of our population is in an area that has DIC protections. I think we'll move one more slide. This is a zoom in of the western slope because that's where we are today, and we want to hone in and focus on the fact that these are large rural census block groups, and as such, they cover a large area. One of the largest criteria that impacts this area is the low income definition, is the criteria that is shown in purple on those slides. And so you can kind of see which communities have met that definition and on which basis. And so focusing on the low income, I think, is really relevant for the discussion we'd like to have today, connecting that to workforce. With that, I'll move back to just show the slide here. Just for context, for teeing it up for Tyson to talk a little bit about his experience on the task force. And Tyson, can you explain from your perspective, what do you think the intent of the EJ Act was and any kind of key considerations the task force had? That's one question. And then to build off of that, can you explain how this has affected community involvement overall?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, the intent of the Environmental Justice Action Task Force was to take hold of the EJ Act and come up with a framework of recommendations to give to the legislature. It was known right off the bat that any inclusion of disproportionately impacted communities as far as definitions are concerned or regulatory rules and regulations would either need to be, proposed through a rulemaking or through legislation. The Environmental Justice Action Task Force really took that upon themselves to go through where the big fallouts would be, and it was labeled in the act to increase in community engagement. One, as one of the major pieces of that, to prevent the environmental injustices that had happened in the past in certain scenarios and cases. As my involvement as the only non-renewable energy member of the task force, I had a lot of experience with oil and gas siting, understanding where locations need to go and making sure that you go through a good process for that. As we went through the EJ recommendations, it became very apparent that a blanket one-size-fits-all was not going to work everywhere. The biggest piece of that was, as we drew down on the data of how you would identify disproportionately impacted community. The only data set that was out there that provided enough information to really define that based on the criteria was the census block data. We had just went through US Census, and so we had census block data, but as you can see on the map, as you saw on that previous map, the census blocks are much different on the West Slope. And I immediately identified that and said, you cannot make this the same across the board, as the West Slope will be impacted in some very negative ways, and there will be unintended consequences. They understood that, the entire task force understood that, and in the recommendations and with the recommendations was the understanding that, you know, the definition of disproportionately impacted communities needed to be more, I guess, consistent throughout all of the regulatory agencies. They also needed to utilize the task force recommendation in their rulemakings and or legislation. And as we'll talk about later, and as you can probably imagine, me being 7 foot tall and having custom-made clothes that don't fit, if I were to, you know, wear Sergio's suit, it probably wouldn't look right. One size fits all doesn't work, especially in the case of disproportionately impacted communities. So we'll get through some more of that, but I'll definitely hand it off to Chris to kind of talk about the next piece.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So Chris, I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit about how evolving regulations have impacted you and your company, like planning operationally, and if there are similar themes that you see in other energy companies as well.
Well, yeah, I think, again, I can certainly speak to that. I do want to set the stage a little bit again when we talk about DIC impacts on Laramie Energy specific, but so in Garfield County, we have roughly 56,000 gross acres. 95.8% of that is within a mapped DIC for economic factors.
95%?
95.8, yes. In Mesa County, we have roughly 150,000 acres, and we're about 50% of that is in a mapped DIC in eastern Mesa County. And again, so I mean, there's two things I think to take away from that, and I'm glad you put the map up there. But most of our operations, and again, just to finish that note off, effectively all of our active development is 100% within those DIC areas. Some of our fringe acreage that's part of those larger totals don't fall within the DIC. But so I mean, it's a huge deal. But I think the other thing really, again, to take away from it when you look at the census blocks and where we operate, you know, in most cases we are 6, 7, 8, 10, 15 miles from the nearest RBU or receptor. You know, we're operating generally in the middle of nowhere, and we're being held to incredibly tight, again, one-size-fits-all DIC regulations that force us into doing a lot of things that just seem impractical and make it difficult. Sort of though, to follow on to your question a little bit, and I've got a few things to cover on that, I guess, but you know, we've already talked about the multitude of different rules, regulations, whether it be ECMC, CDPHE, that have come into place that are impacting our development and operation. And I think the big thing that always comes with us is, again, a lot of where we operate is rural, it's complex. It takes us a long time to go from the day we think we want to develop an area to actually getting out there. I mean, we're talking 4 and 5 years, and I think the last 5 years with evolving regulations and ever-changing, or I guess I'll even say ever-moving goalposts, it is really a challenge to put all that together and have a successful development. I mean, again, a lot of these places are really complex. We're doing multiple ALAs. We're trying to find the best place, and it's just feels like we can never catch up to get in and get the permits going. And again, I think the other thing to note with that, you know, when we talk about the various rules and regulations, you know, each one in and of itself generally is maybe reasonable and doable. But when you lump them all together and compound them, it really is a significant hurdle to planning and development. So,
That's excellent. I think we can talk a little bit more about that. I'm wondering, though, if we want to move on to Sergio and ask similarly, how have the evolving regulations in Colorado really impacted you as part of the Pipefitters Union?
Yes, thank you. And you don't have to make fun of the short guy, it's all right.
I was just making fun of the tall guy.
Yeah, for definitely right. The energy transition that Colorado has been forced to take has significantly reduced the work project opportunities, traditional in fossil fuels, right? For example, like power generation is the biggest one right now, but also has significantly impacted our work opportunities for members working on the gas distribution, right? It's just especially on the infrastructure work, okay? But also that leads over to a lot of the manufacturing facilities that is a big part of our work, a big part of what we do. It's manufacturing facilities. Let's think about like the Coors Brewing Companies, Leprinos, those major manufacturing facilities that are going to have a huge need for large energy usage is going to have it's definitely going to have an impact on expansion, future expansion, right? Expanding the work opportunities. We're pipefitters. We like to build stuff, right? So that's going to definitely impact our jobs. But also that can impact, plants that are looking to move into Colorado, right? That will eliminate a lot of those jobs, and they're not going to move here. So energy definitely affects everything we do, but it's a tremendous effect on the way that we put members to work. Where there's an uncertainty for a facility owner or a decision maker to that are waiting to understand how regulations affect their business. What that translates to us is for our contractors, it creates a hole on their work schedule, right? What that means for us is there's layoffs. We get layoffs. And that leads to an ability to bring in new workforce, like new apprentices into the trade, okay? They won't come in, and at that point, we can't train the workforce for future projects, right? It's as far as wages and stuff like that, there's a clear delta of traditional fossil fuels energy industry versus the utility scale renewables. It's been in our experience that when we look at utility scale renewable projects, the vast majority, if not all, of those projects are being done with out-of-state contractors, out-of-state workers, right? And what that means is that Colorado doesn't benefit the economic benefit from those projects, because those funds, that money does not stay in our communities, right? So definitely energy affects us in everything we do.
Thank you, Sergio. And it reminded me when we saw Will's presentation earlier about how oil and gas production has declined since 2019, although it's increasing, but the jobs haven't come back as much. And I immediately thought of how that ripple effect will affect the Pipefitters Union and the other types of jobs in the industry. So that's excellent. I think I would like to, at this point, open it up to the full panel, really kind of challenge ourselves to think about how can we collaborate more as a group to more effectively protect our most vulnerable communities, and consider how to create economic opportunities. I think this is really, I see this question as really being fundamental to all of the other talks that we've been hearing today, is really trying to bridge these different perspectives and understand and unpack the tensions to create a better opportunity for all. And following on that, what do we need to achieve better outcomes? So both like where are our opportunities and what do we need to realize those opportunities? I just kind of want to open that up to the group to initiate.
Well, from a regulatory standpoint, the legislation as well as the regulators and the operators need to continue to work together. I think the regulatory agencies have done a good job of holding comprehensive rulemakings to understand what the total impacts can be. However, that hasn't always been the outcome of the final rules. And there are various reasons for that. The latest example would be the produced water rulemaking, where in that produced water rulemaking, the legislation said prohibition on water facilities within a DIC, obviously not taking in West Slope into account, because the unintended consequences of not doing that are very damaging. And I'm sure the county commissioners and the local government liaisons here can attest to. So, when legislation is being drafted, a simple solution to that is write your legislation, include extra protections for DIC communities, and follow the EJ task force's recommendations. That leaves the regulatory agencies with the full book of their regulations to implement that. And since this has been done, if you remember, the EJ task force recommendations were done in 2023.
Right.
In the last 2 years, the things that we've added for community engagement, we have Jessica and Stephen who are now going to be part of the community involvement of the ECMC. You've got cumulative impact studies. You've got additional definitions and protections already built into the ECMC rules and regulations. So that has already been added since before this legislation was passed. And what you're ending up with is legislation on top of legislation on top of, or rules on top of rules on top of rules that are due to the timing and implementation of those, and those need to be taken into account.
So I see some specific recommendations is more coordination between the legislators and the EJ task force, at least on the recommendation side. And I think I'm hearing maybe slow down a little bit to enable the bills to be implemented. Is that right? Am I paraphrasing that correctly?
One of the tough things with legislation is it takes time to draft legislation, pass legislation, and implement legislation. And when you're too prescriptive on that legislation, you're going to miss everything that happens within that time frame. And that's really what's happened. And the prescription that was given by the legislation was too specific in that instance, and it had an effect and tied the hands of the ECMC. So I think it's really important that that when legislators are drafting stuff, that they take into account what is going to happen between the time that it's written and the time that it's implemented.
Excellent. Okay, I think that was very helpful to elaborate. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, and I think I was just going to, mention again, from a Laramie standpoint, I think all West Slope operators, we're committed to transparent communication in our communities. Like I said, I live in the town of Colburn, which is primarily where we operate. Those are my neighbors, and trust me, they appreciate the clear communication, and they're also quite quick to call me out when we don't. So, but again, I think you have to look at the whole DIC mapping process, and again, the regulatory framework of it just needs to be, achievable, reasonable, and sustainable, that we can have development. And I think we're missing the mark, and I know that's kind of what you had talked about too, Tyson. But there needs to be some reasonable off ramps or variances, ways to respond to these communities. And again, I wanted to mention a little bit, as we talked about it before, but the little town of Colburn where we operate, I don't know, 1,000 people, whatever, small community, it's all within a DIC. Right outside of the community is not in a DIC, so and that's actually where the people live. It's so contrary, because it's forcing us, if we really want to look at long-term development, to actually produce water facilities, and DeBeck is the same way, nearer to people, nearer to communities, because they're not in a DIC, because we're prohibited to do so. And again, when we talk about that and economic prosperity, again, just for an example, and we'd put these together when we were kind of going through our notes, and I know Mesa County's heard this from us before, but Little School District 50, Plateau Valley, Laramie and its few subcontractors represent 84% of the tax revenue for that entire district. So when you want to talk about, what's right for a DIC and for a disproportionately impacted community, strangling the, 84% of the source of their entire revenue doesn't seem to match up. So.
Yeah, so I think I heard you kind of echoing a little bit more of that call for flexibility in that, and I think the recognition of the importance of the economic drivers. Let's not cut off our nose to spite our face. If we're trying to improve the economic conditions of low-income communities, we need to make sure that we don't stifle economic opportunity.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think the intent of what the legislature was trying to get at is good.
Yeah.
But I think they've missed the mark, and they've tried to make it too rigid, and it needs to take a little step back and figure out how to make it still meet the intent, but have enough flexibility to be reasonable and workable.
All right. And Sergio, what are your thoughts?
So if we could pass legislation to affect rulemaking process to make sure the jobs and workers' impacts are fully incorporated into the existing economic or cost-benefit analysis, so we can truly understand how regulations are affecting jobs, right? Right now, it is not clear how much consideration true job impacts are taken into account. incorporated in the EIA or cost benefit analysis at all. We fully agree that bringing the evaluation process to the legislative level would be helpful in creating legislation that would direct our state department to create a process where workers' impacts are truly being accounted for during the regulatory process, right? And I wrote it down because it's very important for us. Like we want to make sure that workers are that jobs and workers' impacts are being recognized and how that regulations affect us.
And as you know, as leaders of small energy company, or a small energy company on my behalf, larger on his behalf, but you know, you look at the tariffs and what they've done. The market uncertainty people have frozen in place. Well, that's what's been happening to our industry for years. We are hesitant to move forward. We are hesitant to grow. We are hesitant to hire more people. We will use out-of-state contractors because they're willing to drive over here instead of hiring local people who can work constantly and consistently, because we don't have the confidence that we're going to be able to continue down this path for a certain period of time.
Well, I know that that's about all we have for our dialogue, but I think in the interest of bringing this dialogue to the larger audience, I think this is the perfect audience to really soundboard these ideas and hear your input and consideration of how can we be working more collaboratively across this space. So if there are any questions from the audience, this is a perfect time. While you're making your way to the microphone, I'll just say that I really appreciate the stellar ideas and recommendations already brought forward. I see this as a group as being an incubator to hopefully start the conversation or bring the conversations that we've been having in different elements of this conference, bringing them full circle and having a more integrated discussion about how to consider workforce at the initiation, how to involve communities as part of the decision-making process, how to have flexibility built into the consideration so that we don't stymie our own growth and development. I do not see any questions. How is this possible?
Oh, you got one back there.
Go ahead, there's one right there.
Good, I'm glad that you saw something.
Hi, everyone. Stephen Arauza here, the ECMC Community Liaison.
Hello.
Also, I wanted to say I appreciate the involvement of Sergio in this conversation, because as we talk about the data, the considerations that go into the definition of a disproportionately impacted community, the definition casts a wide net that does include economic considerations in addition to demographics. Those economic opportunities have been a big subject of the conversations that we've had today. As an officer in the state employee union, I understand that union jobs provide a very important opportunity for folks to lift themselves out of dire situations, and so I appreciate Sergio's input on that. And I would just like to know, what is the landscape in the DJ versus in the Piceance for using union labor and organized labor? Because one of the ways to provide stable financial opportunities is to do exactly what Sergio is doing and lifting his family up with these union opportunities. So what does that look like across the state in the industry?
I love that question. I think you're essentially asking if our opportunities are equitable in different locations. And do you have insight into how does your union represent different areas?
So I think what we would like to see, or we're always in favor of, is prevailing wage, right? That brings the wages up to a even playing field, and that way out-of-state contractors don't undercut our economy, right? It gives the contractors an even playing field to bid on those projects, right? It's not a, bottom bid, that the lowest bid is the one that gets the project.
Yeah, the question is, specifically, are union jobs available to workers on the West Slope? And to what extent are they available in the DJ?
Yeah, I mean, definitely we got as a Pipefitter local union, we got a local union in Grand Junction. Those jobs are available, and everybody's looking for jobs, right? So yeah, we're always looking, we're always hiring. We have a shortage in manpower, right? That's why we always push apprenticeship utilization, right? So we're training our workforce.
Yeah, and to what extent, on the operator side, is that being promoted for use internally to propagate those opportunities further?
But, and I'll let you kind of expand on
You
this.
were,
but-
you were going to expand on it.
I think that one of the issues on the operator side, again, is that certainty. You know, to go into a union contract or understand that you were going to promise a certain amount of work when we don't know for a fact what our next year's workload is going to be, because of the uncertainty, and the regulatory is hurtful to that cause. Again, kind of like with the U.S. economy, certainty is necessary for operators to really plan their work and execute their work forward. And like Chris said, there's a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of plans are being broken by things that are ever evolving. So I'll let you.
Yeah. Well, and I would just second that as well. But I would also say a lot of those union jobs, big project jobs in Western Colorado would associate around plants, facilities, and larger infrastructure. But again, we're struggling in the Piceance and in Western Colorado. I think back in the heyday, we had 100 rigs. And I think last year was a banner year when maybe we had 4. So we are, I mean, really, again, there is opportunity, but I think a lot of that opportunity is going to, you know, revolve around an expanding industry, a healthy industry, and, you know, the need for expanded infrastructure, new facilities, new plants. At the moment, again, we're not developing fast enough to get to that point, but that's.
That infrastructure usually takes commitments from us to begin construction on, and it's hard to give commitments when you're uncertain.
Yeah, and I know there are other partners too in the basins that have struggled even with getting permits and getting the plants up and going. Even if they have a need, have the money to build it, getting the permits to make it happen, it is all a process.
All right, well, I think we're over time. I definitely want to make sure to continue the conversation. Please find us at the break, after the break, the steak fry, excuse me.
Stir fry?
Stir fry.
Not a
We're
stir
doing
fry.
international.
Hey, how about a round of applause for these folks? That was great.
All right, well,
Critically important topic.
Thank you for being here.
Kirby?
Thanks, Kirby.